up, friends? It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today I wanted to talk about, one of my favorite times of the year is WrestleMania time. Not actually for WrestleMania per se, but I actually really enjoy the fact that the Hall of Fame decides to select a handful of former WWE talent, anyone related to any of the businesses they bought, like WCW, ECW, all those. Anybody that they feel is worthy, or one man feels is worthy, gets the honor of having their career remembered on the night before WrestleMania. And so, when I met Jerry the King Lawler, I asked him about several people that I couldn't understand were not in the Hall of Fame. And he basically said, the Wrestling WWE Hall of Fame does not exist as a physical building. It exists in one man's mind, Vincent McMahon, and who he decides a couple of weeks before WrestleMania that he wants to honor. And so I always feel like there's several people that are left out blatantly. So today I'm going to talk about 10 of the people that I think should be in the Hall of Fame, or at least had an in-ring career, someone affiliated with the WWE, WCW, had a worthwhile in-ring career that they should have been in the Hall of Fame by now, but something has kept them out. And as many cases I can think of, I will tell you what I think has kept them out. So let's explore some of the WWE superstars that I feel should be in the Hall of Fame. Now, one of the first people that comes to mind is the total package Lex Luger. Lex started out as a football player, was a fantastic college athlete, then went pro, had some injuries, and through the help of his friend Ron Simmons, ended up finding his way into wrestling. And the guy just had an amazing physique, and so he immediately looked great to audiences. He was a great baby face. He was a great heel throughout his career. He didn't start out being very good. He looked good, but he wasn't really that technical in the ring, and he wasn't a great talker. But over time, with joining the Four Horsemen and just being put into bigger and bigger cards and bigger spots, he ended up developing into a really great wrestler. As far as at least being a fan favorite, he was a two-time WCW World Heavyweight Champion. He was the WWA World Heavyweight Champion, also a five-time WCW United States Heavyweight Champion. Now, he did leave WCW to join WWF at one point, and it was actually Vincent McMahon was interested in pro bodybuilding and had signed Lex Luger to be in his pro bodybuilding federation. And when that went under, he brought him over to the WWF and promoted him as this narcissist character, and then eventually tried to make him his #1 star in like his Hulk Hogan type role. But people just really didn't seem to gravitate towards Lex. He wasn't, at that time, a lot of people said he had a little bit of an attitude, and when he did a cross-country bus trip promoting himself as the champion, just people didn't really relate to him. And so he fell further and further on the card and never materialized into that superstar that WWE had wanted. So he ended up leaving, going back to the WCW for the first episode of Monday Night Nitro. And some people believe that that was a slap in the face to Vince McMahon. He had a great career over there as well. He teamed up with Sting quite a bit, and then was an opponent to the NWO when that started. But where a lot of people feel that Lex ruined his career was he was doing a lot of pills at the time, and even though he was married, he had been paired up with the lovable Miss Elizabeth in a storyline where they were together, and they ended up developing real feelings, shared an apartment together, and eventually Miss Elizabeth was found dead in the apartment. And it was one of those things where a lot of people in the business blamed Lex for that, or they thought that it was his influence that kind of led her down that path. He has since, over the years, done everything he can to change as a person, and he's the #1 person I hear other wrestlers say that they think should be in the Hall of Fame, that has redeemed themselves, that is not in the Hall of Fame currently. But as we've seen in the past, you never can say never, because with Vince McMahon, he can bury the hatchet at any moment, and any year could be Lex Luger's year. Now, following right up with that one, hand in hand, goes Miss Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth started out as a commentator for Angelo Poffo's wrestling organization. She was the girlfriend of Randy Savage, Randy Poffo. And when Randy ended up signing a contract to come to the WWF, he brought Miss Elizabeth with him. And they did this whole thing where there was a storyline where every manager in wrestling wanted Randy Savage, and when he finally decided, he chose Miss Elizabeth. And Miss Elizabeth was just perfect for her role because for some reason people just loved her. And when Randy was a horrible guy to her, they always felt sympathy for her, and they always for some reason loved her for still standing by him and still having his back and never leaving. And eventually their real life marriage and relationship fell apart. Liz left the business for a while and then came back into WCW and was involved in a long line of the NWO storylines. A lot of times she really wasn't doing much. She was just kind of there. They didn't really have her say anything. They didn't really use the charm that she was known for. And eventually, as I said, she developed a substance problem that her and Lex Luger, Lex has admitted to, that was something that was definitely their downfall, and she ended up passing away in their apartment. And it pretty much from the moment she passed away, WWE has never mentioned her, never mentioned Lex. They basically seem to just sweep anyone that has anything to do with drugs or anything illegal under the rug, and those two have sadly, I think, belong in the Hall of Fame, but are not there yet. Next, I think one of the top of my list also is Kamala the Ugandan Giant. This guy, 380 pounds, terrified me as a kid. He was a Ugandan giant, cannibal, headhunter character that came to the ring, slapping his belly, couldn't speak English, had a handler that helped stop him from attacking the crowd. The guy got started as a wrestler slash truck driver. He went by the name of Sugar Bear Harris, and one night went in and met Jerry the King Lawler. Jerry Lawler saw him and immediately envisioned this Kamala character and told him, go home, come back tomorrow night. And when he came back, he painted him up like Kamala. They had a great match, and that was the start of this Kamala gimmick. Now, WWF would end up signing Kamala, and he would be used to put everyone over. He would work with all the top stars, from Ultimate Warrior, Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker, Jake the Snake Roberts. I mean, he really was put in to get major stars over, and it was sad because he would say throughout his life that he never was paid for the amount of people he was put in seats. He was always lowballed. He was always low paid. Even when he started to have pain in his feet from going barefoot, he asked Vince if he could try some sandals. He had these primitive looking sandals he wanted to use. They said absolutely not. He just felt like he was always treated as a low-class person. He would even write a song called Push It, which I kind of believe is maybe one of the reasons he's not in the Hall of Fame, because he mentions in the song how he's, you know, been bamboozled on his money. He mentions other superstars that would do sexual favors in order to keep their job. He mentions people doing steroids. He mentions the drug test and that anybody that they wanted to pass could. I think just he's left a bad taste in the WWE's mouth, and it's sad because he was such a superstar. He never had any titles to speak of. He was never a champion in there, but he did so much to get over the people that became superstars that I think it's travesty Kamala's not in there. So Kamala Ugandan Giant belongs in. Next on the list would be the tag team of Demolition, my favorite tag team from the late 80s. They were the longest tag team championship team for holding the tag team titles for 475 days, I believe. And that stood until 2016. Now, they took on everyone, and they put on just absolutely fantastic matches. They were, if you watch WWF, you like Demolition. If you watch WCW, you were probably a Road Warriors fan. Very similar style tag teams, had very similar appeal, and eventually, like I said, when Legion of Doom came over to the WWF, they would have a feud against Demolition. Some great matches also against the Brainbusters and the Rockers and Strike Force, the Orient Express. The problem is that apparently there was a lawsuit in 2016 that over 50 wrestlers had joined onto, claiming that they had had some sort of brain injury or some sort of injury that they incurred while working for the WWE, and believe that the WWE was responsible knowingly. And pretty much everyone that's on that list has not been invited to be in the Hall of Fame, and both Axe and Smash are on that list as people that had joined on to the class action suit. And so who knows if they'll ever get in, but I do believe that they absolutely belong in. The main two, I mean, I know they eventually brought in a third, Crush, but the first two, Axe and Smash, were the classic team. They belong in the Hall of Fame. Another no-brainer for me is Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, Psycho Sid, whatever you want to call him, the big man. He just belongs in. I remember from the first time I started watching WCW, seeing him in the skyscrapers. Guy just had something that was eye-catching in the ring. Beyond just being huge, he was a physical specimen. He was over 7 feet tall. Absolutely amazing. Was a member of the Four Horsemen, and then had his stint as Sid Justice over in the WWF. Even held the championship title at a time where people like Hulk Hogan were there, Bret the Hitman Hart, even beat Shawn Michaels for the title. Problem is, he doesn't, in order to be in the Hall of Fame, I believe you have to accept it, or if you've passed, someone in your family has to accept it. And I've heard in different places that Sid doesn't want to accept it. He doesn't feel like his career was worthy of it. He feels like an injury that he had in the ring cut his career short. I have also heard other people say that he was hard to get along with at times, that he didn't seem to be in it for wrestling. He was in it more for a paycheck. I heard people even complain. They said that they felt like he cared more about softball back in those days, which I've heard him say that was just something he did as exercise, and people have blown it out of proportion. I'd heard stories that he didn't want to attend pay-per-views because he had a softball game, and he's refuted those. So there's a lot of mystery surrounding why he's not in the Hall of Fame, but I think just the level of stardom and the matches that he had in big-time shows, I think he definitely belongs in. And he was WCW Heavyweight Champion. He was WWF Champion. He belongs in. Now, our next one is not a wrestler, but I think just about anyone who's ever seen him perform believes he should be in. The great Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette, one of the greatest managers, bookers, wrestling minds there was. One of the greatest talkers that we will ever see in wrestling. The guy was through and through wrestling in his blood. From the time he was young, he was a fan. Then he became a photographer. Then he got involved in the business as far as working. The guy's broken his knees or whatever from falling from a scaffold during a match, and just had some of the absolute funniest, best promos. He did exactly what you were supposed to do as a manager. You were supposed to interfere, make sure that your guys won. You were supposed to talk for them. You were supposed to get the audience to hate you and hate the people that they managed. And he did all of that while going to the ring with a tennis racket. I remember as a kid just thinking what a goofy thing that looked like, seeing him always come to the ring with a tennis racket, and how stupid the referee must be to not know what he's going to do with that tennis racket. And yet that thing would always be there, and it's just become a staple of the great Jim Cornette. So I think just on the promos and the things that he said alone, he belongs in, but just also his wrestling mind and everything else, it's a real travesty that Jim is not inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, that also could be because he doesn't want to be in, and I really don't know what the reason is that he's not in there yet. Now, the next one is a guy that I love to hate from the WWF era. Started out as a great babyface. I mean, he had a career long before WWF. He was a star and a champion before that, but once he came to the WWF and was teamed up with Tito Santana of Strikeforce, became tag team champions, ultimate baby faces, until Rick the Model Martell turned on him. That's right, Rick Martell, I believe, belongs in the Hall of Fame. He changed to this model gimmick, and he would walk to the ring with a sweater tied around his neck, and he would have a bottle of fragrance that he would spray in the air that was called Arrogance. And he was just, you loved to hate Rick the Model Martell. The guy had an amazing physique. He drew a lot of heat from the crowd, and he was a really good in-ring performer. I know he suffered some injuries and did eventually go to WCW. Some people believe maybe that left a bitter taste in Vince McMahon's mouth because he was going to come back to the WWF when he was healthy and then got a more lucrative deal with WCW and then went over there and then eventually did injure himself. But Rick the Model Martell, I think, absolutely belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I think the only reason he's not in is it seems like for many years he left the wrestling business. I believe he's in real estate. And he just didn't want to be in the wrestling business and had really not been a part of it, not acknowledged it, didn't want it to be a part of his life. However, I've noticed on his Twitter recently, he has started posting photos and little tributes to his career. So I think he might be coming around to a time where he might want to be in the Hall of Fame. And if so, I would love to see Rick the Model Martell in there. Now, sadly, the next one, I do believe based on what he did in the business and in the ring, he would belong in, and that is the Canadian crippler, Chris Benoit. However, probably one of the most famous cases or stories that we know about in modern wrestling, this guy who had it all. He was one of the greatest technical wrestlers in the ring. The fans loved him. He just seemed to be, all the wrestlers said he was the hardest working guy. He always wanted to improve, always wanted to be the best. Just seemed like he was a very good guy to be around. And then his best friend, wrestler Eddie Guerrero, had an untimely, and we found out from Dark Side of the Ring that Chris Benoit's entire personality changed. He fell into a massive depression and would be inconsolable for a lot of the time and started having very public disagreements with his wife, Nancy, who was the in-ring performer woman. And sadly, we would find out one day that Chris Benoit would not show up to a wrestling event that he was supposed to be at. WWE called the police department where Chris lived, and when they went, they found that Chris had taken the life of his son and his wife and himself. It's always been one of those things to me, as we mentioned earlier, that there were 50 wrestlers that were in a lawsuit claiming that they had head injuries. Chris, his finishing move was a diving headbutt off of the top rope. I somehow think that he, like a lot of athletes, might have sustained some sort of head injuries over his life, and with Eddie's death, something just completely changed inside him. But sadly, with what his actions were, the WWE has basically erased him from their history, and he will most likely never see the Hall of Fame. This person, I think, is probably one that I really would love to see the most, and it's just such an unfortunate set of circumstances. Owen Hart, the great Hart family. Of course, we know Owen was an absolutely amazing wrestler in the ring, a technician beyond belief. He was raised in one of the greatest wrestling families that you can have, and really was a practical joker. Everybody behind the scenes loved him, and he really wanted to do well. He wanted to be a successful wrestler. He wanted to, make the company happy, and he agreed to do a stunt as the Blue Blazer one night, and the company did not hire. We found through watching the Dark Side of the Ring episode, it just seems like they did not hire a company to do proper type rigging that was able to support Owen. And when they tried to do a zip line type deal to the ring, it snapped and Owen passed away. And his family was absolutely heartbroken, as you can imagine. And they went hard against WWE and Vince McMahon, and they have never forgiven them for that. And that is a big reason why Owen is not in the Hall of Fame and probably never will be, because I don't believe his widow or his kids will ever forgive the company. I don't think they'll ever want to have him a part of it. And I've heard Bret Hart say that he feels like, enough time has passed to where he feels like he wishes that the other members of the family would would maybe have a change of heart, because what he had said, and it's a really good point, is he said by Owen not being in the Hall of Fame and not being included in the DVDs and the collections of his career and everything, it stops a lot of future fans and people that will eventually become fans and everything from ever knowing who he was. And so I know Brett does feel that he wishes that they could all find a way to make amends and put Owen in the Hall of Fame, but currently there's no sign of that happening, and it's unfortunate. But if there's one thing that we've learned from the WWE, like I said, from Randy Savage to the Ultimate Warrior to Jeff Jarrett, people that we've always heard have had issues with Vince or may never get in for one reason or another, sometimes we see that changes, and hopefully the people that we see on our list today will eventually end up in the Hall of Fame. I want to thank Dee for becoming my newest Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next time.